Hello students, welcome to BBA 204. In part 2 of my lecture today, I will talk about different models of decision making in management. There are three types of decision making models. Decisions are usually made using the classical, the administrative, and the political decision making. So there are three types: the classical, the administrative, and the political decision-making model. The classical model is also known as the ideal or rational model. The choice of model used depends on the manager's personal preference, whether the decision is programmed or non-programmed, and the degree of uncertainty associated with the position. Let's first start with the ideal rational model. This is the classical model of decision making. So the ideal rational model is the classical model of decision making. It is based on the assumption that managers should make logical decisions that will be in the organization's best economic interests. There are four assumptions of the ideal rational model. The decision maker operates to accomplish goals that are known and agreed upon. Second, the decision maker strives for conditions of certainty, gathering complete information. Third, criteria for evaluating alternatives are known. And the fourth, decision making is rational and uses logic to assign values, order preferences, evaluate alternatives, and make the decision to maximize goals. This is indeed the most important assumption of the ideal rational model, that the decision maker is rational and uses logic to make the decision to maximize goals. In the real world, however, our decisions faces constraints and limitations. The world is not always rational. For instance, take the example of the management of the coronavirus crisis. I think this is the best example to give for the ideal rational model. We think that stay-home orders are working and always rational. But in reality, infection rates and death rates are going up. People do not stay at home 100%. So what is wrong here? Even though we think that stay-home orders are working and rational, and there is no need to legally enforce them, in reality, this is not the case. Both the death rates and the infection rates are going up. So something is wrong here. So advantages of the classical model is such that it is normative, defining how a decision maker should make decisions. The ideal rational model provides guidelines for reaching an ideal outcome for the organization. So the best outcome for the organization is always the ideal outcome. The value or the advantage of the classical model has been to help decision makers to be more rational. But the problem with the ideal rational model is that it represents an ideal model of decision making that is not often attainable by real people in real organization. This approach works best when applied to programmed decisions and to decisions characterized by uncertainty or risk, because relevant information is available and probabilities can be calculated. So, in other words, it is best to use the ideal rational model when the information is available and the probabilities of outcomes can be calculated. The second approach is the administrative or descriptive approach. The administrative model is considered to be descriptive. This approach describes how managers actually make decisions rather than how they should make decisions. So in this approach, decision goals are often vague, conflicting, and there is lack of consensus among managers. Rational procedures are not always used, and when they are confined to a simplistic view of the problem that does not capture the complexity of the real events. Another aspect of administrative approach is that managers' searches for alternatives are limited because of human, information, and resource constraints. So in this approach, the world is not always rational because there are always human, information, and resource constraints. And the final aspect of this approach is that most managers settle for something known as satisficing rather than a maximizing or ideal solution. Satisficing is exactly the opposite of a maximizing or ideal solution. Herbert Simon proposed two concepts instrumental in shaping the administrative model: bounded rationality and satisficing. Herbert Simon proposed two concepts to highlight the use of the administrative descriptive approach: bounded rationality and satisficing. Bounded rationality means that people have limits or boundaries on the amount of information they can process in making a decision. So our decisions have always limits or boundaries because we cannot fully process the information we need to make a decision. Because managers do not have the time or cognitive ability to process complete information about complex decisions, they must satisfice. So satisficing means that decision makers choose the first solution alternative that satisfies minimal decision criteria. So managers choose the first solution alternative that satisfies minimal decision criteria. Rather than pursue all alternatives, managers will opt for the first solutions that appears to solve the problem. So in this approach, we are not seeking ideal or maximizing solutions. We are seeking the first solution that appears to satisfy the first criteria. The decision maker cannot justify the time and expense of obtaining complete information. For instance, another example is again the management of the coronavirus crisis. During the corona crisis, until we find the best solution like vaccine or cure that treats the symptoms 100%, we should increase the capacity of the healthcare system, like producing more ventilators, more face masks, more hospital beds, etc. So until we find the ideal solution, we should use the satisficing approach, meaning that we should use the first solution that satisfies the minimal decision criteria rather than a maximizing or ideal solution. In this case, the first solution that we must satisfy is to increase the capacity of the healthcare system until we find the vaccination or the cure that treats the coronavirus. Here are the steps in the administrative model that we have just recently discussed. Now let's look at the third decision-making model, which is the political approach. The political model is used for non-programmed decisions. When conditions are uncertain, information is limited, and there is disagreement about the goals to pursue or the action to take. In this approach, managers often engage in something known as coalition building for making complex organizational decisions. So managers often engage in what is known as coalition building for making complex decisions. So what is a coalition? A coalition is an informal alliance among managers who support a specific goal. Coalition building is the process of forming alliances among managers when making a particular decision. So it is the process of forming alliances among managers when making a particular decision. The inability of managers to build coalitions often makes it difficult or impossible for them to get their decisions implemented. The political model closely resembles the real environment in which most managers and decision makers operate. The political model begins with four basic assumptions. Number one, organizations are made up of groups with diverse interests, goals, and values. So organizations are not homogeneous entities. Organizations include groups with diverse interests, goals, and values. Number two, in the political approach, information is ambiguous and incomplete, meaning that there is no right or wrong answer to the problem. Number three, in this approach, managers do not have time, resources, or mental capacity to identify all dimensions of the problem and process all relevant information. And number four, managers engage in the push and pull of debate to decide goals and discuss alternatives. And number five, decisions are the result of bargaining, negotiation, and discussion among the members of the group. The best example for the political model is the federal rule of government in the United States. In the United States, we have a federal government where the responsibility is shared between the central government and the states. For instance, when the president makes a decision about how to best handle the coronavirus crisis, he has to get the approval of governors at the state level. For instance, president cannot issue stay-home order. That decision has to be made and implemented by governors at the state level. In other words, in order to solve the coronavirus crisis, or in order to handle the crisis as efficiently as possible, all the governors in the United States should be on the same page. Table 9.2 summarizes the characteristics of the classical, rational, administrative, and political decision-making models. Please make sure to review this table carefully. Recent research has found that rational classical procedures are associated with high performance for organizations in stable environments. In other words, when environments are stable and information is fully available to all parties, it is much easier to use the rational decision making. This is mainly because the environment is very certain and stable. Administrative and political decision-making procedures are associated with high performance in unstable environments when decisions must be made rapidly, just like the coronavirus crisis. Thanks for listening to my lecture so far. Next week, I will continue my discussion with Chapter 13 and Chapter 19. We will talk about managing diversity and performance measurement in organizations. Thanks again, and see you next week.